Hello and welcome to the Rested podcast, where we explore travel time rather than destinations and the joys and surprises of shared transport. For many, travelling on buses, boats and trains is now a lifestyle choice. My name's Mark Selby. I love the theatre of travel, discovering the stories of journeys and learning how people use their travel time. I wonder what you hope the future will look like. It possibly includes peace, happiness and safety. Not surprisingly, that's what most of us hope as well. I remember a TV show some years ago in which two men with opposing political views were brought to a bar to explore their differences. One regularly voted for left-leaning politicians, the other for those on the right. At the bar, gentle, reciprocal banter about current events soon began. The third person then asked one of the men what he hoped for the future. He was asked not to talk about opposing political views or policies, but just to describe what he wanted to see in the future for his family, community, and himself. The second man was then asked if there was anything in that described future that he disagreed with. The answer was no. As the conversation continued, more common values and shared concerns became apparent. Illogical prejudices began to crumble, and a sense of camaraderie grew. This happened because of them meeting and their finding a path to common ground. Psychologists have noted that contact with strangers, rather than wild, misinformed perceptions of them, has a dramatic impact on reducing our prejudices, distrust, and disagreements. As Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. The chances of meeting people unlike us grow when we travel with strangers. Sadly, there are some that try to stoke fear, prejudice and friction for their own benefit by distracting, misinforming, and trying to manipulate us. But the fact that you're listening to the Rested podcasts suggests you're smart, curious, and have an interest in making a difference. There's a good chance that you're not manipulated as easily as others. Nevertheless, we might think of ourselves as unable to make any significant change in society or to the world of transport, that we're too small to make a difference. But if you've shared a bedroom with a mosquito, you know that's not true. Yes, there are corporations and lobbyists that wield far more power than us, but we can make a difference. People are actually doing it daily. Earlier this year, two teenagers, Freddie Corbett and Harley Hollingworth, were waiting for the last train home in South Yorkshire. They saw a man in a sleeping bag further down the platform. The man suddenly got up and jumped onto the railway tracks, saying he was going to kill himself. Freddie said, "You're not doing that, mate," and without thinking, leapt onto the tracks with a train coming. Freddie and Harley managed to get him back onto the platform 45 seconds before the train arrived. They stayed and talked with him until help came. And making a difference doesn't require such dangerous heroics. You might recall Malin's story of speaking with an elderly lady as they waited for a delayed train. The lady said she'd been visiting her sister who was dying, then started crying, and explained this was the first time she'd told anyone about her sister's condition. Malin, taking the initiative to chat, to listen, and share a comforting cup of tea, made a difference. Many of those around us are lonely, and loneliness can make people sick. It's been claimed that a lack of human contact is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We can make a difference to others' lives as well as our own. The impact of using public and shared transport for some of our journeys instead of always driving a car is also surprising. Apart from increasing the opportunities to meet strangers, reduce road congestion and pollution, we're often contributing more to our local economies than we realise. When not using cars, we walk more. And a recent report by Transport for Quality of Life has highlighted the value of the pedestrian pound in cities around the world. When on-street parking is reduced, purchases in retail stores increase, as does business in cafes and restaurants. But these impacts of changing modes of transport are essentially local. As such, they present challenges to entrepreneurs and engineers because they're difficult to scale and meet the growth expectations of investors. By contrast, they do provide interesting models for what's called the degrowth movement, focusing on the development of services by communities for those communities. Proponents of degrowth argue that economic focus on growth is inappropriate for a world of finite resources and is unnecessary for the further improvement of human living standards. The thinking is gathering momentum and builds on the cooperative business models we've seen succeed in retail and other sectors. One candidate for this thinking is car clubs. People join car clubs and book cars for when they're needed, rather than incurring the costs of owning, insuring, and running a vehicle that's parked for 96.5% of its life. Existing car rental companies can offer short-term rentals in large towns, but struggle to serve less populated towns and villages efficiently. Sadly, these are the very locations where car access is needed most. The potential value of local community car clubs in these areas is very high. Some community transport initiatives are more ambitious. I'm grateful to Phil in Tame for highlighting a new train cooperative in the west of England that's just received regulatory approval. The service will operate between Swindon, Taunton and Weston-super-Mare. It's committed to financing the service through community shares, allowing local residents to invest directly in their railway, strengthening the connection between the service and the people it serves. We can make a difference as individuals and collectively. This week, a majority of Swiss voters, 52.7%, rejected a 5 billion Swiss franc government plan to widen or build new roads on the country's motorway system. The voters rejected claims that the plan would reduce traffic congestion. As we know from previous episodes, those extra lanes just don't work. Restit has focused heavily on road and rail journeys, but arguably one of the most enjoyable ways of travelling is on ferries. Quite apart from providing essential connections to islands, across bays and lakes, ferries can also provide one of the most civilised ways of travelling. Rather than being constrained to a seat, there's room to move around, enjoy wonderful views, meet regular passengers and tourists from afar. And sometimes there's more to the ship and crew than meets the eye. On one ferry, serving the Hebridean Isles in Scotland, the crew used to turn the car deck into an exercise area when the passengers are gone. Sarah Clark, a former stewardess, says, "We had a wee fitness session going, and when we tied up, there was a handful of us who would run up and down the car deck after work. I had my own passenger clicker, and 64 lengths of the car deck added up to a 10k run." The long-serving captain, Tony McQuaid, remembers one sailing when the last vehicle on board was a hearse. They'd not long set sail when they learned the wrong coffin had been loaded. So they returned to port, and it was swapped over, in full view of the bemused passengers. Tony says, in the next day's paper, there was an article on how the ferry had loaded the wrong coffin onto the vessel, but there was no mention of the undertaker. Mary Ann MacDonald, joined as a junior rating at the age of 16 in the summer of 1989, and a few weeks later caught the eye of a young man called Neil from Inverness, who was travelling to spend a weekend on the islands with some friends. When he headed home again on the Monday, they swapped phone numbers, written on a pair of pound notes because it was the only paper they had on them. Soon they were dating, and the following year, sitting on the observation deck of the Hebridean Isles ship on a glorious summer's morning, he asked her to marry him. I said, "Are you joking? Are you taking the mick here?" And he said, "No, I'm serious." And that's when he handed me the ring. The ship would later take them to their wedding on Harris. The couple went on to have 4 daughters, 2 of whom grew up to work for the ferry company. It's good to meet and listen to strangers. It helps us discover what we have in common, new perspectives, and potentially helps make a difference. Thank you for listening and for sharing your stories. Until next time, enjoy your travels. Thanks for listening to the Rested podcast. Please subscribe for details of new episodes and tell your friends. I look forward to reading and sharing your travel stories. Please email restedpodcast@gmail.com. And my thanks to everyone that has contributed to Rested so far. Enjoy your travel time.